Imagine standing in a frozen trench, alone, watching 7 steel monsters rolling toward you across the snow, their engines growling like the engines of death itself. And instead of running, you pick up your weapon and decide to fight. Most men would have fled. Most men would have frozen. But on a bitterly cold morning in January 1944, along the Eastern Front near the Korsun-Cherkasy pocket in Ukraine, one Soviet anti-tank soldier did something so tactically brilliant and so terrifyingly courageous that military historians would study his actions for decades. His name was Sergeant Ivan Grigorievich Dereglizov, and what he did in the span of roughly 8 minutes would save his unit, hold the line, and write his name permanently into the annals of armored warfare history. The German forces, operating under Army Group South commanded by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, had launched a desperate armored counterattack to relieve their encircled troops inside the Korsun pocket, and 7 Panzer IV tanks, detached from the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking, punched through a gap in the Soviet 27th Army's defensive perimeter just as dawn was breaking over the frozen Ukrainian steppe. If this kind of story, the story of one ordinary man standing against impossible odds and winning through pure tactical genius, moves something in you, then subscribe to this channel right now, like this video, and share it with someone who loves real history. Leave a comment below telling us what part of this story you had never heard before, because we guarantee this is not the version they taught in any classroom. The morning of January 28, 1944 had arrived with temperatures plunging below -20 degrees Celsius across the Korsun-Cherkasy region, where Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov had personally overseen the construction of a massive encirclement around nearly 60,000 German and Axis troops. The Red Army's 1st and 2nd Ukrainian fronts, commanded by General Nikolai Vatutin and General Ivan Konyev respectively, had closed the ring around Korsun just days before, creating what German soldiers grimly called a Kessel, a cauldron. The German High Command, under enormous pressure from Adolf Hitler himself, who refused to authorize a breakout until it was almost too late, ordered von Manstein to punch through from the outside with armored relief forces. The 3 Panzer Corps, led by General Hermann Braith, was pushing hard from the southwest, throwing Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs against the Soviet defensive lines in the brutal winter conditions. Dereglizov's unit, a small anti-tank detachment embedded with the rifle infantry, was positioned in a shallow trench line near the village of Lysyanka, one of the most strategically critical points in the entire encirclement perimeter, because it sat directly along the most likely German relief axis. When the 7 Panzers broke through the infantry screen at dawn, they did so with speed and shock, exploiting a gap torn open by a preliminary artillery barrage that had killed or scattered the forward Soviet positions. Dereglizov was suddenly alone with an anti-tank rifle, 2 PTRS-41 rounds remaining, and a handful of anti-tank grenades. What separated Dereglizov from a dead man in that moment was not raw strength, not firepower, and not luck. It was an understanding of geometry, terrain, and the specific mechanical vulnerabilities of the Panzer for that no textbook had explicitly taught him, but that years of frontline experience had burned into his instincts. He knew that the Panzer IV, while formidable in frontal armor with its 80 mm plating, was dangerously weak on its sides and rear, where armor thickness dropped to as little as 20 mm. He also knew that 7 tanks moving in a loose assault formation across open snow would create predictable sight lines and movement corridors, and that if he could position himself at an angle, a flanking angle, he could fire at the most vulnerable panels of multiple vehicles without being in their direct line of fire. The terrain near Lysyanka offered him exactly one chance to exploit this: a low earthen berm running diagonally along the field's southern edge, left by Soviet engineers during earlier defensive construction, which would conceal his approach and give him a firing position almost perpendicular to the Panzer's line of advance. He moved through the snow in a low crawl, staying below the horizon, using the sound of the tank engines to mask any noise he made, and took position behind that berm with his PTRS-41, the Soviet semi-automatic anti-tank rifle capable of penetrating 40 mm of armor at 100 meters, just as the lead Panzer was 30 meters away. The first shot hit the lead tank side armor just below the turret ring at near point-blank range, igniting the ammunition stored in the hull. The explosion was catastrophic, and it caused the 2nd Panzer, following closely behind, to veer instinctively to the right, directly into Dereglizov's prepared grenade position. He had placed 4 anti-tank grenades, the Soviet RPG-43 model, effective against up to 75 mm of armor, in a tight cluster at a shallow depression in the snow just meters from the berm, tied loosely together with wire stripped from a communications cable. When the 2nd tank's track rolled over the cluster, The linked detonations blew the track clean off and jammed the drive wheel, immobilizing the vehicle immediately. The crew of the second tank panicked, hatches opened, and within seconds they were gone, either dead or fleeing into the snow. The remaining 5 Panzers, now suddenly deprived of their lead elements and with visibility obscured by smoke and fire, slowed their advance, which was the single worst decision they could have made. In tank warfare, a stationary or slow-moving armored vehicle without supporting infantry is extraordinarily vulnerable, and von Manstein's troops had pressed forward without the close infantry support that should have screened them against exactly this kind of ambush. By this point in the engagement, and historians who later reconstructed the event using Soviet after-action reports and German unit records estimate fewer than 4 minutes had passed. Dereglizov had already eliminated 2 of the 7 vehicles using nothing but a single anti-tank rifle round and improvised linked grenades. He was now out of PTRS rounds. What came next required a different kind of courage, because it required him to move again in the open, under the potential observation of 5 operational Panzer IVs and their crews. He stripped a Molotov cocktail, a simple glass bottle filled with gasoline and a wick, crude but remarkably effective against tank engine vents, from his kit and began moving around the far northern end of the berm to position himself behind the third tank, which had stopped entirely and was scanning for targets with its main gun. The distance was perhaps 15 meters. The tank's engine was running hot despite the cold, exhaust vapor rising from the rear grille. Dereglizov sprinted the final distance in a straight line, hurled the bottle directly into the rear ventilation grill, and the tank's engine compartment immediately caught fire. The crew, trapped inside a burning vehicle, bailed out into the snow. 3 down. If you are watching this right now and feeling your pulse rise with every line of this story, good. That means you understand what real history feels like when it isn't sanitized. Subscribe to this channel and like this video so that we can keep bringing you stories like this one, the ones that never made it into mainstream textbooks, the ones that happen in the snow and fire and silence of a frozen morning when no cameras are rolling. Share it with someone who thinks war is simple or that heroes are only found in fiction, and drop a comment telling us the most surprising thing you've learned so far, because we read every single one. With 3 tanks destroyed or abandoned and 4 still operational, the remaining German crews, now deeply uncertain about the nature and size of the threat they were facing, did something that was both tactically understandable and ultimately fatal to their mission. They began to cluster together, drawing the 4 vehicles into a tighter defensive formation, engines idling, commanders scanning the tree line and the berm for Soviet infantry. This was precisely the instinct that armored crews develop under ambush conditions. Consolidate, protect flanks, wait for the threat to reveal itself. But Dereglizov had 2 more Molotov cocktails and the terrain entirely in his favor, because the cluster of 4 Panzers was now stationary, their crews distracted by the burning wreckage of their comrades, and the wind was blowing the smoke toward them, further restricting their visibility. He moved through a dry creek bed that ran perpendicular to the German formation, staying below ground level the entire approach, and emerged within throwing distance of 2 more vehicles that were parked almost side by side. He threw both cocktails in rapid succession, one into the rear grille of the 4th tank, one onto the engine deck of the 5th, where fuel lines ran close to the surface armor. Both caught fire within seconds of each other. The psychological effect of watching 5 of 7 tanks burn in rapid succession, in what appeared to be a spontaneous ambush from an invisible enemy, broke the combat cohesion of the remaining 2 Panzer IV crews entirely. In the German after-action reports recovered after the war, specifically those associated with the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking, and later analyzed by Soviet military historians at the Frunze Academy in Moscow, the surviving crews described not knowing how many Soviet soldiers were attacking them, estimating from the pattern and speed of the destruction that they must be facing a coordinated anti-tank team of at least 8 to 10 men with multiple weapons. They reversed their vehicles and withdrew from the sector, abandoning the breakthrough they had achieved, and the gap in the Soviet line at Lysyanka closed again before additional German forces could exploit it. The entire engagement, from first shot to final withdrawal, lasted approximately 8 minutes. Dereglizov was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the USSR's highest military honor, by direct order confirmed through the command chain of General Konyev's Second Ukrainian Front, the same command that would go on to accept the German surrender at Berlin in May 1945, just 16 months later. The broader battle around the Korsun-Cherkasy pocket raged until mid-February 1944, ending in one of the largest Soviet encirclement victories of the entire war. Of the roughly 60,000 Axis troops trapped inside, approximately 35,000 managed to break out on foot in a desperate crossing of the Niloy-Tikich River on the night of February 16 to 17, 1944, abandoning all heavy equipment, most of their wounded, and suffering catastrophic casualties in the process. German sources claim as many as 30,000 escaped. Soviet sources put the number far lower, and historians continue to debate the exact figures. General Wilhelm Stemmermann, the commander of the encircled forces, was killed during the breakout. The relief column under General Braith, the same column that had sent the 7 Panzers forward in that desperate thrust toward Lysyanka, never reached the pocket. The line held. It held in part because of the decisions made by generals and marshals playing the long game of encirclement across hundreds of kilometers of frozen steppe. But it held also because, on a single frozen morning at a place called Lysyanka, a sergeant named Dereglizov chose to crouch behind a dirt berm instead of run, chose to think instead of panic, and chose to fight when the mathematics of survival said he had no business doing so. That is the nature of history's most defining moments. They do not always happen in grand headquarters with maps and medals on the table. Sometimes they happen in 8 minutes of fire and snow, alone, with the roar of steel all around and nothing left to lose. The German relief operation failed not because of a massive Soviet counterattack or a brilliant strategic maneuver ordered from Moscow. It failed, at least in that one crucial sector, because one man understood angles, armor, and silence better than 7 tank crews understood caution. Sergeant Dereglizov's actions at Lysyanka in January 1944 are a reminder that the outcome of the largest conflicts in human history can pivot on the smallest decisions made by the most unassuming people in the most desperate moments. Subscribe to this channel right now if this story moved you, like this video so more people can find it, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to act in spite of it. Leave a comment below telling us what you found most remarkable about this story, whether it was the tactics, the man, the battle, or something you had genuinely never heard before, because stories like this one deserve to be told, remembered, and passed on.